Okay, so we're with Mike. Hello, Mike. How you doing?
Yeah, yes, we're here as well.
Brilliant. So all the way from deepest, darkest Cornwall. What we're going to do is we're going to have a bit of a fly around of the world. So hopefully here at the moment we can see a nice 3D image of the Earth that's just zoomed in on the United Kingdom. And what we're going to do is just going to kind of fly into some places and talk about the coastal processes that take place. Mike's going to give us some kind of tips about how they form. So the first one we're going to look at is in Devon. So we're going to zoom in on Torbay. Mike, can you tell us much about Torbay in terms of the geology?
Torbay is really interesting because what we're technically looking at in Torbay is a whole series of rocks which date from the Devonian period. They're all about 380 million years old, there or thereabouts. And when you actually look at Torbay, it's almost like you've got two wings making almost an amphitheatre. And those two wings are relatively resistant, hard Devonian limestone. And then in the middle of the bay, from the same era, you've got a whole series of clays and mudstones and slates, quite weak slates, which have eroded away over time with rising sea levels because they are much softer rocks. In fact, to the extent that Paynton had a brick building business based on the clays that actually form the middle part of the bay in Torbay.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So you've got Berry Head in the south, and then you've got Hope's Nose in the north.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got the big bay that's formed through what kind of processes, Mike, will have formed that?
Well, basically, I mean, you will have extensive wave action. Wave action will erode what's soft before what's hard.
Yeah.
And if over a long enough period of time, if it's stable, it will literally eat a channel back between two solid rocky outcrops. And we see that an awful lot around the southwest coast, where you've got a couple of headlands which are resistant rock, and the cliffs have literally been eroded back. Yeah. And what we'll see in this fly through, we'll see different scenarios because the speed at which it happens is completely dependent on the resistance and the toughness of the rocks that the wave actions are working on. Yeah, something is consistent. Tides are consistent. One thing that will be interesting now, of course, is we've got with global warming, we're all looking forward, inverted commas, to more extreme storm events. And storm events is what really drive sudden and radical erosion, which we see in some parts of Britain.
Cool. So that's really what when we see a headland and a bay in this kind of setup, you're just seeing that kind of difference in the bedrock.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that's really common pretty much everywhere you look. So that's a really important process to consider. What I'm going to do at this point then is just flick through to our next location. So we're going to fly to the east of England now, to Beachy Head. And this particular area here, not far from Dover, it's a really nice 3D image there of the lighthouse at Beachy Head. It's really nice, just sat there on the wave cut platform. What I was going to do is just zoom in on a really nice picture I found on the beach. And it's just going to zoom around here onto the wave cut platform. Mike, we've already talked a little bit about the wave cut platform formation in video 2. But did you want to just talk us through what's going on and what gives us this really flat, rocky shoreline?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when we're looking at the chalk, we're looking at a surprisingly deep, consistent layer of rock. It's Cretaceous era chalk. It formed in a tropical marine environment. But what we've technically got are these relatively consistent cliffs, so that when they erode, they tend to erode back with almost a perfectly vertical cliff front.
Yeah.
But of course, what usually protects the base of cliffs like that is a beach formation or a scree formation of some sort. But at Beachy Head, you've got chalk. Chalk is relatively very soft, especially when it's broken out of the cliffs. It is taken away almost immediately, and the sea effectively saws the landscape at the base of the cliff off flat. So instead of seeing the gravel beds and the sands we'd expect to see at the base of some cliff sets, here we have this almost perfect raised beach profile.
Yeah. Is this bedrock on the platform a different type of rock to what we'd find in the cliff?
No, it's just a relatively resistant band of chalk.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all the same material. It's all the same material. I mean, the chalk there that we see exposed on these cliffs goes down for another 100 meters or so.
Oh, it's really deep then. Yeah.
So
in this image, we can see what on the right-hand side of this image, it looks like there's been some kind of slip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, you've got, if you think about it, if you've got a vertical cliff front like this, in some places it will cut away and it will form virtually vertically. If you look at that picture to the right, you've got that green band where you've got the slippage, and then you've got a virtually vertical face to its left.
Yeah.
But if you've got any minor fractures or weaknesses and then water gets in, it will just slip.
The whole lot.
Weaken the rock there and it will just slip.
Yeah.
You know, some of the more dynamic processes like freeze fall aren't part of our landscape anymore, but they certainly were. And I mean, the other thing you've got to remember when you look at anything that you're looking at in pictures of the coast and you're thinking about coastal erosion, our sea level is 100 meters higher now than in the middle of the last ice age.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some of the processes are different, but we'll see that when we look at a couple of other sites in this set, which are quite interesting.
Cool. So let's move on to the next one. I think I've jumped an extra page there a minute. Hold on. Let me go back to number 10. There we go. So we're going to jump now to Dorset, and we're going to go to Durdle Door. I really like this image. It's very nice because there's half a person just that stood there. Somebody's obviously merged together two images.
I think they clearly have. I mean, Durdle Door is fascinating. It's probably one of the most important geological sites in the whole of the British Isles, because what we're actually seeing in Durdle Door, we're seeing a whole sequence of rocks from the Jurassic, a whole sequence of these rocks. But these rocks have subsequently been folded by tectonic activity. So what's actually happened is they've been formed into a classic upward anticline. So basically that's what we see. But what's now missing is the bottom part of that. Why has that been eroded? Because the rocks that were in the center of this folded over into an arch sequence of rocks by tectonic processes were relatively weak. So classic wave action has literally eroded out the rocks from the softer rocks from the center of this arch, leaving the harder limestones, etc., which make the classic arch shape over the top. Really great site.
So what would this have looked like a couple of million years ago?
If we went back to when these limestones were actually made, which takes us best part of a couple of 100 million years ago, we'd be looking at a shallow marine environment, something like the English Channel is now, probably somewhat warmer. When you're looking at limestones, you're technically looking at corals, you're looking at those sorts of sediments that form in that sort of depth of water. I mean, it is just a fabulous site, and this one is particularly well documented. There's some very interesting geological. If you look up Durdle Door, you look up the geology of Durdle Door, there's some really detailed things, and if you look at the maps alongside this, you can really see it. And if any of the students out there, if you are dead interested, I would really recommend to you go to the BGS website and you find some of these sites and just pull up the geological maps of these areas. They really add something to the way you actually look at the pictures. It's interesting stuff. Okay, what's next then?
Before we move on, Mike, I just wanted to focus in on this particular formation, actually, because it's a really interesting shape, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like this flat rock that sticks out of the headland. And you just see it coming into shape just there. There's this really thin, narrow structure. Is that a different type of rock to the rock that's around it?
Yeah, it's what we've got here. This is clearly a resistant band of rock. What we've got we've got here, we've got down here, we've got We've got a different deposit here. We've clearly got limestone in this front one, which again forms something resistant. And also, one thing you've got to remember when you're looking at processes, some processes are very slow, and some people are unfortunately finding now some marine erosive events are actually very quick. You know, you only have to look at the speed at which in some parts of the country houses and things are disappearing. And what's interesting about the whole of the Dorset coast is it's a smooth, long curve. So as well as getting direct erosive processes that we'd expect with wave action from the sea and the stuff coming in from the sea, we've got a clear movement of material along the coastline. We can get a drift of material along the coast. Now, very often you'll see beaches and other formations start to move along coast by what is referred to as longshore drift, but that's because there is this net movement along. But of course, that net movement is also an erosive power, and if you've got genuinely soft rock between a resistant band of rock like that, it will erode it out. But this is not being eroded out from the front, this is being eroded out from the side.
Okay, cool. It's really interesting. So I suppose it's worth considering then what is going to happen to Durdle Door in the future. And I guess this slide kind of summarizes it, but maybe if we move on to our next location. So it's worth considering the fact that Durdle Door will have been a cave at some point.
Yes, I mean, but that would have been the case with Durdle Door. But as I said, the cave roof would have long since collapsed in and all the rest of it. And then you would have had those continuing processes that took out the softer part and so on. But we see many formations like that. It's all interesting stuff.
So we move on to the needles now, which are on the tip of the Isle of Wight, on the western tip. Can you just talk us through the needles? Yeah,
but before we talk about the needles themselves, if anybody watching this video clip, if you travel up on the road, say the one out through Dorchester and out through the New Forest, you go across the inland part of the landscapes and you will drive across ridges. You will either drive up ridges, sometimes you will climb up the side of one and go over the top. What we've got where the needles are, we have got exactly that. We have got the remains of an ancient ridge that ran out from where we are in this picture out over where the needles are now into the distance. And what has actually happened over time is, because now the landscape is relatively flooded, basically the softer material has been eroded, and the harder material, some of the material underpinning the ridge, is left as these exposed structures at the end of this. So think of this as a ridge running down into the sea, and then just think about all the wave action, think about the erosive processes from the side, the softer material's gone, and we've been left with a set of outcrops of relatively harder resistant rocks which make the needles.
Brilliant. Yeah, so you can really see
it when you look at it like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just jutting out there into the sea.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
As I said, do remember, I mean, to give you a real impression of how much sea levels have actually changed, the Dogger Bank, there's actually the remains of very, very ancient woodland clearances. There are encampments. There are all sorts there 100 meters under the North Sea. The Dogger Bank within human memory was not human memory, but certainly within human culture, our British culture, the Dogger Bank was land.
Yeah.
And that takes you back, 10,000-15,000 years? Not much more
fairly recently in terms of geology then.
Yeah, back into the last sort of glacial fluctuation. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cool. So if we just quickly move on then to our last location for this section. A bit closer to home, I guess. We zoom in on Burr Island. I think we talk about Burr Island because it's a really good example of what we know as a tombolo.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through that process, Mike?
Well, this is one of these interesting ones, isn't it? Because this is where Burr Island is clearly a hard lump of resistant rock that was left behind as the coastline eroded back around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That gives us our island. That gives us the hard part of Burr Island. But then we get back to this driving force, which is the southwesterly gales, the key wave directions that are coming in on the coast. And then because you've got underneath this beach formation, if you could actually see this under the sea, you would see the hard rocks dipping down and then coming up to Burr Island, forming like a ridge underneath. Well, that's become an accumulation point for sand moving one way from the coast this way, and also deposits coming down the river to the other side. Net result is that you get this ribbon structure, this sand structure, which eventually will consolidate into what we see today. And that gives us our consolidating feature, which is this. So here we had, at one point, that gap would have been eroded out, and then it's been redeposited. It's a bit different to the other things that we've actually looked at. It's very interesting, actually.
So why does that form? Is it being built from both sides?
It is being built from both sides. Yeah, you've got deposition from both sides. Very often, when deposition is taking place, stuff is being eroded, and then it's being moved somewhere else. But in this case, you've got net deposition from both sides, so that you haven't got the losses, and then this will create this. And if it's sat there for long enough, you'll get natural processes which will tend to cement the sediments together, chemical processes rather than compression processes.
Yeah.
And then that starts to lead to the formation of a more permanent structure, which is exactly what we see there. And we see very much similar things happening on some of the other big headlands, particularly on the Humber.
Brilliant. So it's quite different to a spit then, essentially.
Yeah, different to a spit. It's different to a spit because in a spit you've got material that's being formed and being deposited because of the net direction of currents, whereas here you had this structure which had been left behind because it was hard resistant rock, and then that almost created like a catch point for the sedimentation to take place.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's a particularly interesting site. Not heavily researched though, and not heavily written up.
Okay, so they might struggle to find some information on that particular one.
I think they would compare with the others. The others, there is all sorts of stuff out there, so it's easy to find the other stuff. It's no real issue on that front at all. Yeah, but it's interesting stuff.
That's great. Well, I think we'll conclude there, Mike. That's been really, really interesting content, and we'll put that on for them.
Yeah,
a bit later today.
Hey, it'll be interesting to see
how much for your time.
Yeah, and I must admit this is a nice way, I think, for us to put stuff out. So let's see what other videos we can come up with for them.
Absolutely. That's great. Thanks very much, Mike.
Cheers, Thank you, Joe.